3, 2, 1. Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, let's imagine this scenario. A commercial airline with hundreds of passengers gets hijacked by terrorists, is uncontactable, and currently flying off course towards a capital city. Senior military officers in that situation would make the decision on what to do based on saving the most amount of lives and reducing collateral damage. That is to say, the lens in which they view the world is largely utilitarian, and at the end of the day, the end often justifies the means. So in the course of what to do in the situation, they would probably scramble a bunch of F-16 fighter jets, fly up to space, and shoot it down, killing all of the passengers and crew on board, but it's justified because they save thousands of people. Ladies and gentlemen, there's obviously backlash in that situation, wherein the family of those people are absolutely going to lose their shit because these people were killed by the state, and possibly leading to more war or conflict within those particular areas and causing certain geopolitical and economic tension. These are the realities which have to be comparative with how politicians see the world. This is bad because precisely of what opening government characterizes these senior military officials to be. They're old, patriotic, battle-hardened, stuck in their ways and experienced with what works that have been ingrained in them for decades. This becomes the very blinders that skew and bias their decisions to be able to do what is necessary, even at the expense of not being cognizant to the reality of how these things can affect the country and the world. Opening government fears the military-industrial complex. Do you know who funds the military-industrial complex and who has major stake? It's probably these rich incumbent senior military officials or people in the CIA who are major shareholders in Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, etc. Do you think politicians like Biden or Kamala are really part of that? Maybe to an extent, but in terms of what's really happening, it's all optics. These are the puppets and these are the fall guys of the very military-industrial complex. We think that both politicians and military officials exist in a spectrum, which is why a lot of what's said in the debate thus far kinda doesn't matter because it really depends. They can be rational or irrational. They can be fair or biased, selfish or selfless, corrupt or not corrupt, smart or not. But uniquely, and the path to victory coming from closing opposition, which we answer uniquely upstream of what happened in opening deadlock, is to answer 3 questions, ladies and gentlemen. Number 1, what is the comparative between senior military officials and politicians? Meaning, what change do we get when it's politicians who actually are able to have this particular veto power as opposed to what side government asserts? Number 2, what is the opportunity cost of a veto, and how exactly do we make decisions, and how do we make good and better ones in terms of looking at what happens in the future? And thirdly, where is the world and society just better off in the long term in terms of sustainability and not getting wrecked by things like war, inflation, and geopolitical conflict, which may happen when the very people who have vested stake and bias in military decisions are the same people who have a veto power as such. Firstly, the intuition pump here is about looking at the forest and the trees and not getting too caught up in the trees that you miss the whole bigger picture of the forest. A question I have is, what incentive do these military officials have to not veto or redact their veto at any point in time it's inconvenient? Meaning, if it puts their very kin or their very troops in line, they're probably gonna veto that. Or if it means being able to save more civilian life and reduce collateral damage, they're going to do it no matter how much it entrenches us in geopolitical and economic conflict. We have to understand that the current structure of how senior military officials are and how politicians are that senior military officials, to a large extent, are subordinate to politicians. This is me saying that politicians can make an informed decision, co-opting a lot of the benefits that opening government talks about. Opening opposition didn't really answer who politicians were talking about, but to be charitable to their side and to be able to have the best possible debate, I'll take you in a bit, we need to assume we're referring to politicians who can veto. That is to say, the executive office or higher ups in legislative and senate, politicians who actually matter. The difference here, ladies and gentlemen, and the comparative with politicians is the breadth and scope of knowledge and the connection to the very people who voted, appointed, and elected them into power. That is to say that we think they have the backing and support of the people who are taxpayers and they're aligned with the state interest precisely because they represent the voice of the people. Their ability to see the bigger picture precisely because they are going to get reelected or want to get reelected, this is me making what opening briefly said but didn't talk about, is exactly what becomes the ultimate check and balance for them to be able to listen to what the people want and make decisions and use a veto strategically based on what those individuals want. Go for it, who raised the POI earlier.
The bigger picture misses out the details, but why would saving lives of their army not be something that senior military should factor in while taking decisions? Why is that a bad thing?
I'm saying that given that's their proximate and urgent prerogative because of what you guys had characterized, is exactly what puts that priority as opposed to looking at other things. Meaning, if getting revenge or saving their troops from IEDs or the Taliban means having to invade a village, means that they might not be cognizant to the reality that that might start even more war, just like what we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, wherein sure, you had politicians on both sides of the house saying, let's not get into it, but senior military officials who were able to influence these politicians in a particularly harmful way were the ones who continued to be able to push that. Why? They wanted revenge for what happened in 9/11 and were also motivated by those particular capacities because they were upset by the loss of American life and life around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, emotional decisions on both sides of the house can be made, but in terms of looking at short-term versus long-term strategic value, we need to err on the side who has a broader spectrum in terms of what is affected to be able to help and protect the world. For these reasons, we are very proud to stand on side opposition.